Hello and welcome to the Atlas Agency, a channel all about Arkham Horror, the card game. I'm your host Brandon, back today to share my impressions of the scenario, The Boundary Beyond, from the second Mythos pack of the Forgotten Age cycle. The Boundary Beyond is scenario number 4 in the overall Forgotten Age campaign, and in it we find our investigators returning to Mexico following the stateside events of the previous scenario, Threads of Fate. This time, though, we're not back in the jungle environment we explored in the Forgotten Age Deluxe box. Instead, The Boundary Beyond takes us to an urban environment, Mexico City. I always think it's neat when the game visits real-world settings. We saw that a few times in the Path to Carcosa, always to good effect. The Boundary Beyond likewise makes great use of its setting. This scenario explores the relationship between modern Mexico City and its pre-modern foundation, the Aztec city of Tenochtitlan. After the Spanish conquest of Tenochtitlan in the 1500s, Mexico City was built over the ruins of that Aztec site, and that physical overlap between the two cities, ancient and modern, serves as the inspiration for The Boundary Beyond. I think that's a really interesting choice, and it aligns perfectly with the scenario's gameplay hook, which sees the players crossing back and forth between those worlds. Like Mont Saint-Michel in the previous cycle, this is a setting that, as far as I'm aware, doesn't really have a prior connection with the Mythos stories that inspired this campaign, but nonetheless it makes for a great fit, and I think that that's a great credit to the creative talent behind this game. On top of the setting, I also enjoyed some of the story bits in this scenario, especially the treatment of the campaign's primary NPCs. So on the theme and story fronts, I think there's a good amount to appreciate here. But those factors are only a part of the equation, and unfortunately I have to say that from a gameplay perspective, I really have not enjoyed The Boundary Beyond all that much. In fact, this has turned out to be one of my least favorite scenarios in the game to date. That may be a little bit of a surprise because I'm normally very fond of the type of scenario structure that's used here, the checklist type scenario. I think the blame lies largely at the feet of the explore mechanic. This is another explore-focused scenario, the third in the campaign, and it's the first to try a major twist on the way exploration works. The Deluxe Box scenarios both stuck pretty close to the same formula, the vanilla version of Explore. Here we get a new flavor. That's something I was looking forward to seeing as the campaign progressed, but as it happens, I feel like The Boundary Beyond took one of my least favorite parts of Explore and sort of doubled down on it. With vanilla Explore, sometimes your only reward for the action that you spend to explore is a kick in the shin. In The Boundary Beyond, taking an Explore action becomes more challenging, more difficult, and yet your reward for clearing those hurdles is still sometimes just getting kicked. I was looking forward to the implementation of Explore here. It looked interesting in the official preview article, but it just didn't end up being as fun as I'd hoped, and making progress with Explore here often feels like pulling teeth. I think this may be especially true in solo play. I have a feeling that with the way Explore works here, it doesn't scale very well for solo. That may actually be a common thread throughout the Forgotten Age. I kind of wonder if maybe there should have been some effort to scale the exploration deck based on the player count, like for example adjusting the number of treacheries based on the number of players. Another thing I dislike about The Boundary Beyond is its rude willingness to undo the player's progress. I think it's satisfying in scenarios where there are multiple objectives to be able to bank some accomplishments, to be able to say, I know if I get this character interrogated, that's done. No matter what comes after, I'll at least be able to count that one success. The Boundary Beyond, however, is willing to let you backslide, and that's something I found I really disliked. The biggest culprit is a chaos token effect that couples a somewhat steep modifier with a potentially progress erasing penalty. That was a big source of frustration, probably the single thing that hurt this experience the most for me. One last thing, and I'll admit I'm definitely dipping into nitpicking mode here, but this scenario ends with an interlude which to me feels to be somewhat awkwardly placed. I think it really belongs at the beginning of the next scenario's insert instead of at the end of this one, since it can affect setup for the next scenario, but there's no campaign log instruction that's generated, nor is there a reminder in the next scenario's insert. I think it's really an interlude to do right before you play Heart of the Elders, and not necessarily one to do right after playing Boundary Beyond. That may not sound like a very meaningful distinction, but if you're playing things as they're released, when you might have a month before you pick up the next scenario, then with the way this was done, you could very easily forget this and misplay. After my first plays, I started just making myself a note to come back and do this as part of setup for Heart of the Elders. I think this more than likely just came down to the page count. There's space for an extra page here, so that's where this text ended up, but still, it's not ideal. And after I wrote this, I saw in the latest FAQ that a section had to be added to address how instructions like this interact with side quests, like Carnival of Horrors, where you're not immediately continuing the Forgotten Age campaign, so I feel a little more justified in nitpicking on this, since it did kind of create an issue there. So overall, while The Boundary Beyond has a great theme, for me it wasn't a great play experience. I had high expectations based on the preview, but those didn't pan out. I think if you're someone who really enjoys a challenging scenario, then there's a good chance you'll get more mileage out of this one than I did, but me, I found it more frustrating than fun. One final note to add, I think another thing that hurt this experience for me was the fact that I played Boundary Beyond quite a bit before I moved on to the next scenario in the campaign. I had a gap where I couldn't get together with my blind playthrough partner, so rather than move on to the next scenario by myself, I spun my wheels on Boundary Beyond for a bit. I think I played it and replayed it about 13 times before I first played Heart of the Elders. I don't think that did Boundary Beyond any favors. Knowing now how Boundary Beyond impacts Heart of the Elders, kind of what it means for the campaign, I think being aware of those things would have probably melted off some of the stress and frustration that I felt when I was playing it. I wrote the bulk of this video prior to playing Heart of the Elders, and I'm hopeful that next time I revisit Boundary Beyond, with that future knowledge, I may find myself enjoying it more. And that's it for this look at the Boundary Beyond. As always, thanks for watching the Atlas Agency. For more of my Arkham stuff, you can check out the Atlas Agency WordPress over at atlasofarkham.wordpress.com. And until next time, good luck in your own investigations of the Forgotten Age.